I wanted to say one last thing. On our website, you can see better pictures than this.
Yeah, we apologize for this.
We apologize for this. There's something in the here that didn't work. Yeah.
Okay, are there questions from the audience, from folks? If there are no questions, that's scary. Yes. The website is theharrisonstudio.net. Well, that's a nice thank you. But
I was wondering if, an idea came to mind earlier, and I was wondering if you all could also address, or have you thought much about or done research into a related issue with crop production and food, and that's the issue of the bees.
the question is, have we done research on the crop production of food?
And especially the relationship of the role of bees.
The role of what?
Honeybees.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, cross-pollinating bees. I don't know if you have any comments. I was just wondering.
Wow. Look, we have a fair-sized body of work that deals with farming. Most of it's about how do you operate external to a world of monoculture that operates in terms of cause and effect instead of in terms of systems well-being. So that's where our focus is. The destruction of honeybees, for instance, is an outcome of that kind of thinking.
And is really, in the long run, one of the disasters that is bringing on the global warming. It's an issue of global warming. It's killing off part of a life system that is necessary to maintain a lot of other lives, and therefore vital to all of us.
You have a question?
Yeah.
You want to take this so people can hear this? Okay. Or shout.
So, I first saw the lagoon cycle at the LA County Art Museum. It changed my life. One of the things that was in it, though, that struck me as much as the environmental stuff you were doing, was a story you told about going to the temple of Buddha's tooth in Kandy.
Yes.
And hearing the monks say Buddha's truth, and getting really mad at the guy because he's hiding Buddha's truth, and he's telling you Buddha's tooth, and you're hearing Buddha's truth. You've dealt with a lot of cultures around the world and the stuff that you're talking about. What has your experience been in kind of how different cultures receive this?
Wow, okay. If you take a taxi in Munich and you ask the taxi driver what he thinks about the problems of global warming, particularly the problem of overproduction of nitrites and nitrates, he'll tell you. That is to say, there are really informed populations. Then that'll happen in Holland too. Never mind that this person was trying to be a doctor but couldn't get a job. But still, so in Sri Lanka, nobody thought about that kind of stuff. I think that we're facing such a flow of events that it may end up pulling the whole world together. I can't tell. Go ahead.
Hey, you can come up to the mic. I think that's the best.
Why don't people take the mic?
Come on up. Thank you, for doing some of the most important work, probably the most important work, and Shelby and Beth for bringing you here. I'm just wondering if you've been in touch with Governor Cuomo or anybody else who seems to be semi-activist on the issue of East Coast thinking around moving boundaries, or at least preparing for another Sandy-like storm. And I know that this is all bound up in states, state boundaries and politics that are almost too formidable to imagine having a real conversation about it with this country right now, but have you?
We did a work about 20 years ago about Manhattan being flooded. If we do the drawing. What we're doing now, we have one of our sons there who's active in doing such work, but we...
I want to say what Josh is doing.
Yeah.
Well, we think that industry has to change. So we've made a business plan, which since we think $1 trillion industry is going to start to happen, where you shift to the well-being, global well-being, and monies flow that way because they have to if we're going to survive. So while we haven't talked to Cuomo, he didn't call us up. We're invited. Von Weizsäcker, when he was president of Germany, got in touch with us, though. So it's not impossible, just improbable. Go ahead.
I'm good without a mic. Your work seems ideally suited to digital global mapping, and I'm wondering if you've become engaged with that at all.
Yes, although I don't know how, since it's intuitive. There's no doubt that, we began in the 70s, early 70s, working with mapping, understanding that almost all maps we saw were political or economic statements that got you here or there and that dealt with control of the land. And so we started to make maps where we mapped in our information and mapped out them. But I'm not sure, only when we start to work, like with this piece right here, using Google mapping, we'll show that area changing at 1 foot every 2 decades to see what it looks like. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I was actually referring more to the digital spherical maps that are replacing globes for trying to map trends on environmental and demographic information on a global basis. They're actually spheres.
Yes, okay, yeah. The answer is we're really vague on it, and the answer is we would if we could. Go ahead.
What are your projections about population growth during the time periods that you've been discussing here, and how do they factor into the future scenarios?
Well, the only thing that can deal with population growth as far as we can make out is some kind of women power. Only women power will do that. And it's starting to happen in various places. As a man, I'm sort of critical of the female race because I think the female race needs to become a little more active. And I think that at the moment, well, this is Helen's notion. Helen thinks that we need to have a global testosterone reduction operation. So I don't know if that answers your question, but other questions? Go ahead.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, it is really loud, to your commitment to poetry and art within these projects. Because you're not just taking on global warming, but you're doing it, through poetry. And I think that that's what's so notable about your practice.
Okay. Helen's ground is in literature, and she certainly introduced the literary power in this work back in the early 70s. I myself also am a poet. And what we concluded was that math is a language of condensation. It compresses. And poetry does the same thing through metaphor. And so the reason we use the poetic form is you can stuff a whole ton of stuff, like that whole Tibetan piece. You got it in 2 minutes. We got driven to do this, in part because nobody will stand in front of an image more than 2 minutes. So we developed a way of expressing ourselves in 2-minute sound bites. But
also, Poetry has the incredible advantage of not only giving you the meaning, you not only hear the words with the immediate meaning of them, but you also have not just the denotation of the words, but the connotation and the suggestion. And poetry is a form of suggesting, of moving past the one form into another. And that's art as well. And so that's why we moved into it. We can express ourselves much more effectively there than we can in just making statements about something.
There's one other thing here. Early on, we found out that the image wouldn't carry enough information. Moreover, we found out that the single image didn't do us much good. And so we ended up making installations where you had 8 or 10 images. Each one had its own kind of story. And that it ended up as sort of like storyboards for a movie or a mini novella of some sort. This got us in all kinds of trouble with collectors, because nobody wants to collect 10 images in a row that are telling them they're screwing up the environment. But still, the art of it is the art of finding a balance between word-image relationships and giving voice to it. You'll see it. You'll see our struggle in the gallery, those of you who come. Next.
I was wondering, like, when you present your work in the art world, like...
Yeah, wait a minute. You have to give her something so we can hear it.
What are the challenges and also the benefits you get out of presenting your work as art? Because you deal with a lot. Politics, urban planning, science, and as an artist, I find this interesting, like, you know, talking about these.
Freedom. You see, we did a show in the Gray Gallery, big gallery in New York, in the 80s called Nobody Told Us When to Stop Thinking. You would notice that the landscape architect is prescribed. He's given a list of things they want him to do, then he's supposed to create. The same with the urban planner. People work under instructions from groups, from who pays them. Like, we consider the environment our client. And whenever we sign a contract with somebody, it has a paragraph in it that says, the environment's our client, and if you don't like what we're doing, we'll go away. And if we don't like what you're doing, we'll also go away. And so that clears all kinds of air. Let's just behave freely. You can't do this in most other disciplines. Moreover, we get good grants for it also. Who could believe it? But we're well granted. Other questions?
Keep your hands up and we pass the mic.
Go ahead. You've had your hand up 4 or 5 times. Oh, only 2. But it was a long time.
For students who are interested in pursuing undergraduate studies at UCSC, what would the best umbrella be, like earth sciences, anthropology? If you're interested in paleoecology studies, what's the closest practice someone can get into here at the university that would help them understand your concepts the best?
Hey, we're strangers here. We came from UC San Diego, and we sort of got captured a couple of years ago to see if we couldn't bring a little ecosystemic thinking into this domain. So I can't answer your question.
Can you talk about your center?
Yep, here you go. Oh, yes, we have a center.
I can. Is it Reed? Oh. I'm Karen Hull. I'm chair of the Environmental Studies Department, and so I can talk to you afterwards, but there's options for those types of studies, either through earth sciences, through the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department, or also through environmental studies, so depending on what your focus is. But there's various options.
One last thing. The dean, in his Jaeger, in his manipulation of us, was a very successful one, I would add. First, there's a studio. Well, maybe, okay, we have our own studio and have Then there are some students. That's nice. Then there's a little bit of money. Well, okay. But the corker was, why don't you make a little center? So we invented a center called the Center for the Study of the Force Majeure. It's the center that's doing the work at Sage Hen, and it's the center that's got its first $250,000 or a little less to move forward. So what this place has done for us has enabled us. So we're kind of grateful, but we also like academe. It's a sort of a comfort zone. We spend a lot of our lives there. Other question?
And our daughter graduated from UC Santa Cruz, so.
So we used to come up here.
Yeah, we used to come up here, and it's beautiful.
Please leave your name, because we'll set you up with some interdisciplinary options too at UCSC.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question in regards, Newton, to some of what has been talked about, and this is the word that we've seen being played out over the last decade, this idea of the artist practice. And I look at a dentist as having a practice, or a doctor, but what's your viewpoint around this sense of studio practice? Or I as an artist don't know where to go with it.
I hate the word practice.
Thank you.
Why would I be in a practice? I'm not practicing, except when we're making a poem, and then we do it over and over until it gets better. Or we're making an image. So the practice thing is to scientize us a little bit, or to make us closer to what a sociologist is, or the soft disciplines. So I don't subscribe to the notion. On top of that, we often get questioned on what is your practice? Well, I don't know. We practice differently in each work. So I don't think it's a meaningful question for us. It is for lots of people.
No, I agree.
And it gets people PhDs. Sorry about that.
I feel it's a way they're marginalizing the artist.
So I guess that's a little snotty. Okay, I take that back. Other questions?
Do we have one or two more questions? Because I'd like you to ask or tell us how to enter into the Book of the Seven Lagoons, and if there's a story you can tell us about how you got started. Who are you and why are you my companion?
We started in a very strange way. We did a big work in London. We did a fish farm in London, and et cetera, et cetera. And what we found out, we were working with catfish, and it's a whole story in itself, which I can't go into. It'll take all night. But what happened there was that we found that the catfish didn't mate in the tanks, nor did they travel well on airplanes. So we began a search for a hardy creature that could live under museum conditions.
The hardy creature was discovered by friends of ours in Sri Lanka, in the lagoons of Sri Lanka. And the lagoon cycle began as we understood that a lagoon was a culture, very much like a human being, like a city was a culture.
But it began when we found this hardy crab that was the last to die when the tidal ponds dried up, and could walk from one pond to another, and when the conditions permitted. And so we said, okay, let's see if we can work with the crab. So we created a system, an aquaculture system in a tank in our studio on campus.
And the crabs made it.
And we got the crabs from Sri Lanka. The mother of one of our friends in Sri Lanka went to the market and got the crabs with pegs in their claws and got 24 crabs and wrapped them, each crab, in wet banana leaves and put them in a cardboard box, and they got shipped to the Scripps Institute of Oceanography so that they would be accepted in America. And when we opened the box, we found that most of them still lived under those conditions. There, that most of them still lived. So that began our study, began our work with the crabs. And we're probably the only artists who ever got a Sea Grant, but we did get one, which is the beginning of the lagoon cycle, which isn't the beginning of the lagoon cycle, but is the story of the lagoon cycle. And it began with the crabs from Sri Lanka and making the lagoon. And our trip to Sri Lanka, where we came to visit to study the crabs in their own native environment, affects a good deal of the material in the lagoon cycle. And we began to look at both the culture of the crab and the culture of the people. And we compared them both. And the lagoon cycle is also the story of the crabs and of the people in Sri Lanka, and a way of life and thinking that's different from our own.
That's the first lagoon. The rest of it we get in trouble different ways. The thing about the lagoon cycle that should be understood is that it became a philosophic vehicle. That is to say, how come we collaborated? Did we hear the same thing when somebody told us stories? The answer was no, we didn't. What do you want to do about that? Well, what do you want to do about megalomania? What do you want to do about passivity? All kinds of stuff come up. And the lagoon cycle is the story of me and Helen negotiating our way through a decade. So, thanks.